Welcome back, everyone. Glad to have you with us for another deep dive. Last time we got into connecting Tkinter to a database and how to actually display those records, right? Pretty neat stuff for building interactive apps. But
Yeah.
today we're going to kick things up a notch and make them even more dynamic.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to learn how to fetch random records from your database and then showcase them right in your Tkinter.
Cool. Okay, so why is this so useful? Imagine you're building a quiz app, right?
Right.
And you want to pull those questions randomly from a database to keep things interesting. Or maybe you're working on an e-commerce site.
Right.
And you want to display, random product suggestions. This is how you make it happen.
Absolutely. It all starts with your SQL query. Think of it like this. We need a way to tell the database to shuffle those records and then just pick one at random. So to do that, we use a special clause in our SQL query. For MySQL databases, it's order by rand. And if you're using SQLite, it's order by random.
Oh, so it's really as simple as adding that little snippet to our query.
Pretty much. You add that clause and boom, you're getting a random record back from your database.
I love it when it's that easy. Can we see an example of what this query would look like in action? Let's say we want to fetch a single random record from a table called student2. And this table has columns for id, name, class, mark, and gender.
Sure. For SQLite, the query would be select id, name, class, mark, gender from student2, order by random, limit 0, 1. And for MySQL, it's almost the same. Select id, name, class, mark, gender from student2, order by rand, limit 0, 1.
Whoa, so the queries for MySQL and SQLite are almost identical.
Yeah. The core logic's the same, right? The only difference is that specific function name rand for
Yeah.
MySQL and random for SQLite. But they both do the same thing, fetch a random record.
Awesome. Okay, so we have the query, but how do we actually bring this into our Tkinter app and display that random record?
Well, first, make sure you've got that connection to your database set up. Remember, we covered that in our previous deep dive. You can use the SQLAlchemy library for a smooth connection. Once that's running, you execute your SQL query, fetch that random record that comes back, and then you can display the data using Tkinter labels.
This is so cool because it's so adaptable. We could just switch between MySQL and SQLite without changing a ton of code. Just update the connection string and that randomizing clause in the query, and we're good to go.
Exactly. The main logic stays the same, no matter which database you pick. But this brings up an interesting question. What if you wanted to stop the same random record from popping up again and again? How would you handle that?
Oh, that's a good point. Imagine a quiz app that keeps asking the same question. That would get old fast.
Right.
Yeah.
We need a way to make sure each random record we fetch is, fresh, one that hasn't been shown before. To do this, we can add a status column to our database table. This column acts like a little flag. It marks whether a record has been displayed or not.
So we could use a simple true or false value in that status column. If a record has been shown, we mark it as true, and then our query only pulls records marked as false, meaning they haven't been displayed yet.
You got it.
Okay.
You'd modify your SQL query to include a where status false clause. This makes sure that only those unshown records are even considered for random selection.
That's clever. But wouldn't we need to update that status to true once a record has been displayed? Otherwise, it would just stay false forever and never get picked again.
You're absolutely right. After a record is displayed, we got to update its status in the database to true. That prevents it from being selected again in the next random fetch.
Makes sense. Okay, I'm following along, but I'm ready to see how this looks in code.
All right, let's get into it. We've got some sample code to help you visualize this. We added a simple show button to our Tkinter app. Each time you click this button, it triggers the whole process. The modified SQL query is executed. A single record where status is false is fetched. The data is displayed. And then, importantly, the record status is updated to true in the database.
Okay, this is starting to click.
Yeah.
But what happens when every single record has been displayed once, and they all have a status of true? Does our app just freeze up?
Nope. That's where resetting comes in. We can add a reset button to our Tkinter app. When it's clicked, it runs a SQL command that sets all those status flags back to false. Think of it like hitting refresh. It makes all the records available for random selection again.
So with this reset button, we can keep generating random records as long as we want.
Exactly. No dead ends for the user.
I love it. And the possibilities are endless, right?
Yeah.
You could use this for a fact of the day feature, a random quote generator, a game that involves guessing words. It's all up to your imagination.
Yeah, you got it, dude.
Mind-blowing. It's like we've unlocked a secret weapon for adding random elements to our Tkinter apps.
Haha, I like that analogy. And to make things even easier, we've included some sample code in the show notes. It shows how to create a SQLite database with the student2 table and some sample data. It's a great starting point for you to experiment with.
That's fantastic. I'm feeling inspired to try this out. But before we get too carried away, let's take a closer look at that code and break it down step by step.
Okay, so let's get our hands dirty with the code. You ready to see how it all comes together?
Absolutely. Code is where the magic happens. Let's start with, the essentials. Importing those libraries we'll need.
Right. You'll see lines like import Tkinter as key K, and from Tkinter import to bring in those handy Tkinter tools. And then from squawkame import create and text to work with our database.
Perfect. Now let's talk about connecting to our database. This is a crucial step, right?
You bet. We need to create that database connection. The provided code has two lines for this, one for MySlow and one for SQLite. You'll need to comment out the one you don't need, depending on your database. So if you're using SQLite, the connection string will look something like this. mycon, create engine, SQLite, mydv.db, but you'll need to update this path to point to your actual database file.
So listeners will need to, customize that path to match their own setup.
Exactly. And remember, if you're using MySQL, that connection string will be different. You'll need to provide your username, password, hostname, and database name.
Got it. Once we have that connection sorted, we need to define that SQL query we talked about, the one that grabs a random record from the student2 table where the status is false.
Right on. And remember, this query uses that special order by random limit 01 clause for SQLite and order by rand limit 01 for MySQL to get that random selection working its magic.
Okay, so far so good. Now comes the exciting part, displaying the data in our Tkinter window.
Yeah, this is where things start to get visual. First, we create our Tkinter window using myTinter color. Then we set the window size. In the code, we use myDemoDo.geometry 400 by 150.
Okay, and what about the button that triggers the whole process? We need a way to tell the app to fetch and display that random record, right?
Absolutely. We create a button labeled Show in our Tkinter app. The code for that is b1 equals tk button mydo, text to show, command lambda.myDisplay. This button will run the myDisplay function, which has all the code for the database query, fetching the record and displaying it.
Okay, so the myDisplay function is where the action happens.
Exactly. Inside this function, we start by executing our SQL query. Then we fetch a single row from the results using detarachnu.fetcher.fetchOwn.
But before we display that new data, we need to make sure we're not cluttering up the Tkinter window with data from previous selections, right?
You're right. We want a clean slate each time. So we use this line, w.gridForget, for w and my w.grid slaves too. It basically clears away any old data hanging around in the window.
So it's like hitting the reset button on the display before showing the new info.
Exactly. Once the window's cleared, we can start displaying the data using Tkinter labels. We loop through each element in the data row and create a label for it, something like my label, TK label, my Penter, student, font Tenter. And then we position these labels using the grid layout manager in Tkinter.
This is making so much sense. So after we've displayed the data, we need to update that record status to true in the database, right? To prevent it from being selected again.
Absolutely. That's how we make sure we're getting those unique random records. The code to do that in SQL is mycon.execute text update student2 set status 1, where is plus right plus data row 0.
Okay, now I'm curious. What if all the records in the database have a status of true, meaning they've all been displayed? Does our app crash?
Not at all. The code actually handles that really well. If there are no more records with a status of false, the data row will be empty. And in that case, instead of trying to display data, it'll show a no more records message in the teacher window.
Oh, that's clever. It gives the user a clear indication that they've seen all the available records. But we don't want our users to be stuck there, right? How do we give them a way to, start generating random records again?
You're right. We need a way to reset the whole thing. That's where the reset button comes in. This button we'll call the myReset function, which sets all those status flags back to false. The code for that is mycon.execute text update student2 set status 0.
Okay, so the reset button gives users the power to keep exploring random records.
Exactly. It's all about a smooth and engaging experience. And remember, this code is just a starting point. You can customize it to fit your app's specific needs.
This is all incredibly useful. I'm sure our listeners are already thinking of ways to use this in their own projects. I'm already picturing all the cool things our listeners can do with this, like random record technique.
Me too. It's so versatile. Imagine a language learning app. You could present users with random vocab words for practice. Oh, that's a great one. Or even in a flashcard app, you could like shuffle the deck virtually by pulling random flashcards from a database.
Exactly. And how about a recipe app with a surprise me feature that suggests a random recipe each time?
Ooh, that's fun. Now I'm getting hungry. What about a motivational quote generator, where each click revealed a new inspiring quote pulled randomly from a database?
Yeah, now you're talking. Or even something as simple as, like, a fun fact of the day on a
Well,
website. The possibilities are truly endless.
it's like we've unlocked this secret weapon for adding like dynamic content to our Tkinter apps.
I think you're right. And the best part is the logic is the same across all these different applications.
So our listeners can learn this one technique and then just adapt it to fit so many different projects.
Exactly. It's all about understanding that core concept of fetching random records
Mm.
and then getting creative with how you apply it.
I think it's safe to say we've covered a lot today.
We have. From those SQL queries that make it all happen to implementing it in a Tkinter app, it's been quite a journey. Yeah, it has. Before we wrap up, let's do a quick recap just to make sure everything's crystal clear for everyone.
Good idea. We started by learning how to fetch those single random records from a database using order by rand for MySQL and order by random for Spark.
Right. And then we tackled that whole repetition problem by adding that status flag to our database table.
That little flag is a game changer. It makes sure each random record we display is unique, keeping things fresh for the user.
Totally. And of course, we can't forget about that reset button to let users refresh that pool of records.
Yeah, that reset is key for a smooth user experience.
I have a feeling our listeners are going to create some amazing Tkinter apps with all this.
I hope so. And remember, if anyone needs a little help getting started, we've got sample code and resources in the show notes.
Those resources will definitely come in handy. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of another deep dive. We had a blast exploring random records in Tkinter, and we hope you did too.
It's been fun. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications.
That way you won't miss our next episode, which, by the way, is going to be visually stunning. We're diving into the world of uploading and displaying images in a Tkinter window.
Get ready for some image magic.
Until then, keep those creative juices flowing and happy coding, everyone.
See you next time.